And we are live. Welcome to Future Technical Disruptions. If that is where you intended to be, then great. Let's start by having everyone introduce themselves and say why they think they're here. Let's start with the JRH Lawless.
Sure. Call me Jay. It's easier. I am JRH Lawless. I'm a science fiction author from Atlantic Canada, coming to you from unceded Beothuk and Mi'kmaq territory. I'm a science fiction author and lawyer, and I'm a debut novelist this year with Always Greener, which is my first novel, science fiction humor that came out, and then The Rude Eye Rebellion, the sequel that came out recently, both this year in the middle of the pandemic, which is awesome. In the books, it's all about full immersion technology as applied to ridiculous reality TV, and the social consequences of that, and Marcus revolutionary theory, and all sorts of weird etymology jokes. Anyway, so that's a series. But so what I'm really excited as a lawyer, and since that's my wheelhouse in terms of writing, is to see the social and political implications that technical disruptions have.
Oh, great. Jim?
Sure. Hi, Jim Gunderson. I'm an AI guy. We have a company that people pay us to predict the future for them. So we do AI and predictive modeling. So I feel right at home here. Normally we do micro scale as opposed to macro scale, but nevertheless, author, yeah, but mostly technical books that are only used to torture graduate students at places like the Max Planck Institute. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Oh, great. And can you tell us how this panel is going to go? Can you predict that in detail? It would be helpful.
Can I tell you how the panel's going to go?
You said you did predictive modeling.
Yeah, it's going to dissolve into chaos as we all sort of start sparking ideas off one another.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Steve?
Mr. Barlow.
Hey, yeah, I'm Steve Galima. Been working many years in custom integrated circuit development, especially for interfacing with infrared detectors. We've built systems that are contributed to systems that even are on the Mars Climate Sounder in orbit around Mars. Been there for 10 or 15 years now, I guess, still working. Very interested in all the new things that might happen. Currently, I'm working on self-driving cars, LiDAR systems for self-driving cars. So I think that's probably one of the more disruptive things that's coming along. And we plan to have a product that you can buy in 2022.
Sweet.
Oh, nice. Will?
Hi, I'm Will McCarthy, and I have certainly tried my hand in the tech startup world. I did that for about 10 years, but I'm known primarily as a writer. So I guess that's why I'm here. Yeah.
And I'm Arlen Feldman. I was the co-founder and CTO of Sharewell Software, which I'm told by the marketing copy is one of the worldwide leaders in ITSM software. I write computer books, and I am very slightly published fiction author. So before we start getting into the future, let's talk a little bit about things that were disruptive in the past. Now, I'm not talking seed drills and steam engines. I'm talking about in the last 50 years. Maybe talk about things that maybe we weren't necessarily expecting to be disruptive, or things we thought would be, and what those changes were. So maybe if we can start, and I'll go in the same order, starting with Jay.
Well, it's interesting when you model the past. even going back further to talk about industrial revolution, how industrial revolution at whatever level, be it agricultural, be it steam tech, be it IT, internet based. It's not just the technology, obviously, that makes it a revolution. It's not just an invention. It's the whole system of change that comes with it. So if we talk about the last 50 years and you talk about IT and the third industrial revolution, in a way, it seems to me, yes, obviously that was the massive change, which even in the 80s, people didn't expect. In the 90s, we'd have the internet, that everything would be, so radically different already, let alone, 30 years hence. But in a way, from, talking from the legal and from the political side of things, which is, again, my specialty, in a way, it seems like it hasn't gone the full length, in that we're still suffering today from the disruptive political side of things, like look at Twitter, for instance, and its effect on political debate and social media in general. But I think that institutionally we're still using 1950s institutions. So I think in a way we haven't fully, or it's been stopped potentially, the application of those technologies to institutional spheres.
Jim?
Yeah, I think I'd probably continue on in that vein, because one of the most critical things that we're seeing now is that transition from the curves have crossed. It used to be the technology improvement curve was much flatter than the human response curve. And so when a technology like a steam engine or something like that was introduced, and it was very disruptive, there were time for the population to adapt. Now they're coming out so much faster and so much more quickly that the social ramifications, yeah, you're absolutely right, Jay. The social institutions are lagging way behind. We cannot adapt them as quickly as the technology is changing. And so we're getting this wider and wider gap between where we are comfortable operating and what the technology is actually putting in front of us. So I think, and yet, in spite of doing this for 50 or 100 years, we still are absolutely lousy at predicting what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Steve?
Yeah, it's, I don't know, there's so many things that you could talk about. One that I think that maybe people don't think about too much has been the great improvement, especially you might think about it now in this pandemic, but it has been the great improvement in basically safety, right? 100 years or so ago, when there was the last really big pandemic, millions of people dying was not that big a deal. And even 50 years ago, the number of people killed in traffic accidents was just tremendous. And the chances of your kids living to be adulthood, 100 years ago were such that losing one was not that unexpected. But today it's gotten so that almost everyone survives, at least to a reasonable age. And I think I think that's one thing that's changed, that people are so safety conscious now when they didn't used to be, and much more conscious about anything, any tiny effect of like radioactivity. When I was a kid, you could put your feet in a shoe store and see the bones in your feet, right? And nobody would consider something like that now.
Yeah, well, think where the X-rays are shooting.
Exactly. You want to lean back when you put your foot out there.
Yeah, I actually have sitting from, I found it's from the World Fair, your radioactive souvenir from the World Fair. Yeah, but yeah, the changes in medicine have been just stunning. Even in the last 30, 40 years, you think like, oh, if anyone has, like, you always heard, oh, if you're going for a hip replacement, you're never coming out. That's, that was, 20 years ago, that was sort of common wisdom, but now it's, it's practically outdated.
My wife went in for a hip replacement at 9 o'clock in the morning and was home at 6 in the afternoon.
That's insane.
That's not necessarily because it's good for people, though. It's good for hospitals. It's not necessarily better care.
Well, I don't know. With the state of hospitals, I'd say out is better.
That may be. I think it's interesting, though, just talking about things, predicted futures that didn't happen. You know, steampunk is kind of based on the Jules Verne vision of the future, which was really pretty reasonable. I mean, he was good at extrapolating trends and seeing how the world might be. He just missed a lot, and I think that we all do. So steampunk, in a way, is an homage to things that easily could have happened but didn't. But I've got a short list, and some of this might be controversial, but I mean, flying cars. Flying cars have been right around the corner for decades. If you want to show that something is 30 years in the future, the easiest way to do that is to have a flying car. But you know, when 30 years in the future arrives, it doesn't look like that. It always kind of skitters off sideways. So flying cars, my prediction, not going to happen. You know, people keep trying, keep having prototypes. The problem with a flying car, unless you invent actual anti-gravity, or unless you're willing to embed superconductors in the roads at great expense, a flying car is going to basically be a helicopter. It's going to have to push air downward, and that's very loud. It's very disruptive. People don't like it, and they're not going to. Period. End of sentence. No flying cars.
Well, also the failure mode for a flying car. You know, if your car fails, you have a reasonable shot of pulling off to the side of the road. If your flying car fails, you have a reasonable chance of being collected into a garbage bag. You know,
True.
so
very true.
Although there's a company,
I've got two more items on my list, and then I'll be quiet. 3D TV, people keep trying, and you know what? It turns out people don't want it. Even with glasses-free 3D TV, people just aren't willing to pay the premium to own that technology. What they will pay for, though, is higher resolution, including up to and including higher resolution than the human eye is capable of detecting. People are willing to pay for that. So I'm going to say if 3D TV hasn't happened by now, if it's not mainstream by now, it's never going to be. And on a closely related note, VR. VR has been right around the corner since 1990. All the infrastructure has been in place for VR to take off. It never has, it never will. So there, you heard it here first.
Although one of the ones that sort of snuck in, you know, the Dick Tracy television watches and video telephone calls. Well, I hate to point it out, but it's sort of suddenly we, you know, at the very least, you have to be wearing a shirt, if not trousers, before you answer the phone now. Yeah, by the way, for people who want to ask questions, if you are in Zoom, just hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and we'll get to those at various points. We are vaguely monitoring the Twitch channel too, but up to you. Easier if you do it via the Q&A option, and you can join the Zoom session from the link on the page where you're currently watching, hopefully on the website. It's also in Discord on the channel there. So sorry. What counts as disruptive? I mean, there's technologies that are just, you know, very impressive and come out and people start using them, but do they truly count as disruptive? What do we think of as this has changed the world? And anyone who wants to jump in with this one.
Well, certainly one of the biggest components to be disruptive is the general acceptance or putting it into play. I mean, there are some absolutely killer technologies out there that 5 people in the world can use, and that's not disrupting anything. So it has to spread. It has to be something that just can hit everybody or hit a significant percentage of the population.
It also has to put people out of work. I mean, Craigslist is a really good example of something that's not a technology at all. It's just a slightly different way of organizing information. But Craigslist put thousands of people out of work, and it put whole industries on the defensive. The newspaper industry was really quite dependent on the income that they made from classified ads. The quite unreasonably marked up income that they made. And Craigslist dropped the bottom out of that and was very, very disruptive, despite not really being a technology at all.
But Will, something like cell phones didn't really put people out of work, but they certainly completely changed people's everyday life.
I mean, I think.
It put payphone repairmen out of work.
Yeah, I was going to say it took a long time for cell phones to kill off the landline, but they really have killed it off. No one's installing landlines anymore. There are some legacy landlines here and there, but there's really no reason. Either you have an internet connection or you have a cellular connection. That telephone wire is entirely redundant now.
And people are still
that,
installing fiber optic cables now for better internet speed. So pretty much the same work.
I was just going to say that with regards to disruptive, I think that's easy to think disruptive equals bad, when I think disruption means simply that it's changing the status quo. Again, whether it's putting people out of jobs or not with that change, but on the whole, a disruption isn't necessarily good or bad in itself. It's a change in the status quo, and then it's the consequences that has for good or bad, depending on how, as you were saying, Jim, how people integrate it, take it on board at a society level. Be that on the economic sphere, but then all throughout society. And that's what I think makes a really disruptive technology, which is a technology which I think qualifies in terms of industrial revolution, because it has that massive systemic effect.
What about the little things? I know, Will, you've talked about blue LEDs in the past. That people don't even, you don't even think about it, but I mean, if you think about the change there, Will, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked about blue LEDs every year for the last 30 years, but, or 97 was when blue LEDs came out. So it's 23 years. But yeah, I mean, when the blue LED came out, it was sort of quiet. People were like, oh, okay, well, that's just another color of LED, but it's not. It enabled us to produce realistically visual images using LEDs. And it hasn't happened overnight, but LEDs have been slowly and surely displacing all other display technologies because they're more energy efficient. For an LED to display black requires 0 energy, whereas for an LCD to display black requires the same amount of energy as displaying white or any other color. And so that's an example of something that sort of sneaked in under the radar, and a lot of people didn't appreciate that it was going to change everything, but it really has. You can't, any field of view that you have, at least in an urban area, you're going to see blue LEDs doing something or other. They have almost entirely replaced incandescent light bulbs, because when you can make blue, you can make white. So yeah, that's an example of a single point thing that happened. It was a single breakthrough. Now there are more than one way to make a blue LED now, but that single, it was a material science breakthrough that made the blue LED possible, and all kinds of stuff has flowed out from that single event. But you also have things that look like incremental changes, but they have very profound effects also. One of those is bandwidth. Bandwidth keeps getting larger and larger. Your internet provider keeps offering you higher and higher speeds. And if you remember back in the days when we had dial-up modems, bandwidth was extremely limited. And doing something like downloading a photograph was something that you had to think about because it was going to tie up your phone line for half an hour. Whereas when broadband came around, downloading a photograph you didn't even think about it. Downloading an audio file might be something that you'd think about. Downloading a movie was something that would take hours. But as that bandwidth keeps getting larger and larger, our behavior shifts. We've been disrupted, but it doesn't necessarily happen from a single event or at a single moment.
Sort of boiling the frog disruption.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, another one that I think and
before you go on to a different one to follow up on Will's though, not just bandwidth, but latency is a big issue.
Yeah.
And I was looking at, this was something that I guess SpaceX was talking about their new, is it Starlink, I guess, is their
Starlink, yeah.
set of satellites. And one of the key things that they were saying was going to be an advantage of those is it would give people playing games lower latency all around the world, right? That instead of being limited by the speed of light through fiber optic cables that may not go in as straight a line as you want, and the speed of light is slower in the fiber optic, by, what is it, 50% or something like that, that you would have less latency using the satellite system. And that seemed extremely amazing to me, growing up through the whole space age, that now the most advanced thing that there's going to be was just to reduce latency in playing games.
Yeah, another one that, I mean, there was a huge infrastructure behind it, is GPS, where, I mean, in the 60s and 70s when they were launching the system, it was very specific, but just now, the fact that you can be in some random city and get around, the fact that airlines are much more efficient because of it, I mean, it's changed the way people behave. But you don't think of it as, oh, GPS, now the world is completely different. But I think it's one that's really had a big impact.
No, it definitely has.
Yeah, and that kind of opens up one of the aspects of disruptive changes in technology, which is as the new technologies come out and people switch over to them and become dependent on them, now we've got another point of failure, another path of failure. And, right now, if there were a disruption to GPS, if we had a Kessler Syndrome fire off, pretty much our entire logistics chain of getting groceries into the grocery store would shut down. We're now dependent on a technology that is dependent on things that are in a lot of ways outside our control.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, oh, go ahead.
There are also, it sounds kind of silly, but there are GPS ground stations as well. So if we lost all the satellites, the resolution on the GPS system would drop, but it wouldn't, the whole thing wouldn't go down.
Depending on where you are and how close you are to a station.
Yeah, it is sort of interesting that a lot of disruptive technologies become so ingrained. I mean, how many major cities could survive for more than a couple of days if some of, electricity and some of the other systems that we've built up fail? Okay,
well, yeah, that's a form of disruption. The way things sneak in and make us dependent on them. I mean, 100 years ago, people didn't have, 150 years ago, people didn't have electricity or modern communications of any kind. And now we will literally die without them. But I think 150 years ago, people would be very shocked and disappointed to learn that this kind of silly thing was somehow that our lives depended on it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's when it works and doesn't kill you in doing its normal job.
And the comment there in chat about how delivery trucks stuck on anti-cladding human intelligence reminds me of personal experience. We were driving in Shropshire, so in England, sort of near the border with Wales. And we were trying to find this, me and my wife, who's from England, and we were trying to find this stone circle, this place called Sticker Stones, anyway. And so we were following the GPS, following TomTom or whoever it was at the time. And, it says you go down this path, and, it's a little extremely rural area full of these magnificent hills, go down this path, go down this road, and we're there driving our Audi and going down this road and thinking, this doesn't look like a road anymore. And you got these sheep that look at us through the window. What the hell are you doing? And we were halfway up this hill in Wales, just blindly following what TomTom was telling us. And that's human intelligence error. It's not, TomTom's error.
Yeah.
So,
although to be fair, in a number of places in the U.S., the Mojave Desert in particular, a number of people have died because they were following their GPS that said, oh, the nearest gas station is over here. And it puts them on a stretch of sand and they just, they're 50 miles from everywhere and they die.
Yeah, there's a famous road in England that is flooded half the year, but TomTom didn't know about that. So so about once a week, they'd have to pull a car out of the water. Because people are like, well, says go this way. Okay, so let's get to the crux of the panel. What do we think are going to be the technologies that are truly disruptive over the next 20, 30, 40 years? And you will be held accountable for your prognostications. So if you get it wrong, sorry, but But no, seriously, I mean, as hard as it is to know, what do we really think is going to make the biggest difference to us as a society?
I'm gonna skip mentioning AI because I feel like Jim's got that one covered. But there are William Gibson famously said, "The future's already here; it just isn't evenly distributed." And I think if you want to look for future disruptions, look at things that exist right now, and think about how what'll happen when they do get more evenly distributed. So, two really simple ones that I'll throw out are battery technology and renewable energy, and those are interrelated. But renewable energy has kind of passed parity with fossil fuels in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily cheaper to produce, but it's cheaper to install. So a wind farm is way cheaper to build than a coal power plant, which has the same power output. Renewable energy parity. Renewable energy has been taking America by storm, and we haven't had government incentives to encourage it. And it turns out, it happens just fine without them because the economics are so compelling. And similarly with battery technology, this is something that just quietly gets better and better every year. And we're sort of used to hearing it. We don't even pay much attention because, you're always seeing something in the newspaper or on CNN about some new battery technology. Okay, whatever, great, it's 20% better. But that shit adds up, year by year by year. So it's similar to what I was saying about bandwidth. The things that we do with batteries now are very different than what we did with batteries 20 years ago. And the same thing is going to be true 20 years from now. We'll be able to rely, like glasses, augmented reality glasses. One of the things really holding that back right now is battery technology. But as that bottleneck gets alleviated, you'll see a lot of things become things that are possible now will become easy and routine over the next 20 or 30 years.
Sorry. So I want to disagree with Will on one of his renewable energy ones, though. I don't think wind power is going to be very popular in the future. I think, one, it was subsidized to some extent, but two, there are lots of reasons people do not want it anywhere near them, right? It creates, these subsonic sounds that interfere with, with many people's lives at least, and it's also pretty dangerous to birds and so forth. That I just think wind power doesn't really have that much of a future. Now, solar power can be completely different because I don't think it is quite as much of a problem to the environment. But and also solar power is disruptive in that it does not require it to be done by utility. It's cheaper that way, but it allows us to be more independent from the grid.
Wind power is interesting because so many of the issues with it are perception issues, and that can certainly kill a technology. For example, they kill far fewer birds than, say, feral cats, but we don't start banning feral cats, although maybe we should, or attaching them to windmills. But they've also discovered if they paint one of the propellers on a windmill a different color, the number of birds hit drops dramatically. And then things like subsonic sounds are fixed. So some of the things are fixable, but the perception of them, like the crazy, oh, they cause radiation, blah blah blah. I mean, if people start believing that there can be a pushback.
Sure.
Sure. I'd also want to piggyback off of one thing that Will said, since he's stealing all the stuff from my list, is one of the major things with batteries as well is the recharge capabilities. And I think that's one of the big issues with battery-powered cars. And there are solutions for that coming. I mean, there are lithium-ion batteries being worked on now that can be fast recharged without losing damage by heating them and things like that. So I really think that's one of the ones the battery technology is gonna have a huge impact.
And one thing I think Will said as well, everybody, congratulations, everybody's bouncing off what you were saying, but it's absolutely right, and will be extremely disruptive in the future. So hardcore prediction is augmented reality, because even though we have it today, obviously, it's, Pokemon Go, whatever, and 1,000 games on our phones, but once that starts getting integrated, so whether it's through glasses, through lenses, through corneal implants, through direct brain interface technology, which isn't that far down the line in terms of technological capacities today. Even just look at Neuralink, even though again it's just very much basic start, but it's at the stage where they can show off things. That is going to have major systemic changes on how our cities are organized, how we live our lives, how we interact on a personal level, on a commercial, social level, professional level. Everything, education, everything's going to massively be affected by it. And I think that's one huge disruptive shift that is probably the biggest one I can see, which really qualifies either as fully realizing the third industrial revolution as far as IT is concerned, or possibly even being big enough to be qualified as a revolution on its own, in link with big data and AI.
The only thing I want out of augmented reality is a little bubble telling me who the hell I'm talking to, because I have such a terrible memory.
But
so I need the AI
exactly
face recognition with that too. But,
yep. And you'll have all your info and their profiles. Sorry.
There's an augmented reality app that I'd really like to see, which is one that just constantly flashes up random Shakespeare quotes, so that like once a day you can have the perfect quote for what's happening around you, and you can rattle it off, and people will think you're smart.
So I actually have
everybody will also have the app.
Yeah, I have a story with that premise where the program's called Wit, and it gives you witty things to say, but half the people in the room are saying the exact same witty thing at exactly the same time.
They're all reading the wiki,
Yes. I saw an augmented reality demo not that long ago where for people working in a factory where they have to solder things and put wires together, and the wires that they're supposed to pick up next light up to say red, red. And it's just amazing what can be done.
Yeah.
So does anyone else have any, this is going to change the world things that they believe?
Well, we had a question on the question list about self-driving cars, and since I know something about it.
Yeah, let's talk about self-driving cars.
Okay, well, I don't know. Do you want me to say something first? I mean, I know some things that are happening in the near term, because a lot of people think, well, this is 20 or 30 years out, and at least if you believe, the company I work for, Luminar, has as a customer Volvo cars, and Volvo, is planning to put our LiDAR units into their cars starting in 2022. So just 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And they are, unlike Tesla with their, Tesla's autopilot, that they say, you must keep doing the driving yourself, at least under limited conditions, which are mostly, on highways, that Volvo is guaranteeing that you do not have to pay attention. that the car will safely drive itself, as
Or
long
like
as
most drivers now, really.
yeah, it should be better than drivers now, right? And they are putting their safety name behind the fact that you do not have to pay attention. Now, it doesn't mean that you still might have to take over in some conditions, right? It might say, the road ahead is blocked or something. I don't know where to go, but at least it can safely stop, even if you're asleep, I guess, and there's a problem.
So I think, Steve, that brings up one of the issues that's kind of critical in the whole shared control, model, which is that handoff. The headache is that eventually you get outside the envelope of the system that's doing the automated driving, and it says, okay, it's up to you. Well, you don't have situational awareness. You haven't been paying attention. The speed at which you can acquire that information and be able to make a response can often be result in a time lag that's much longer than you can survive. So that's going to be disruptive in that people are going to have to both be aware but not fully aware, and that depends on humans adapting, and we adapt really slowly.
Well,
that's a great point.
I don't know, at least in this specific case, I mean, it would have the capability that if it gets it's going to say, the exit you wanted to get off the freeway, is 5 miles ahead. Give me a response to say that you're going to be ready to take over. And
Sure.
If it doesn't get a response in time, it can easily pull over to the side of the road and park. Right.
So you end up with just a parking lot on the side of the freeway as everybody waits to wake up. Actually, it's kind of cool because when you talk about freeway driving, the first coast to coast or almost coast to coast example was a Pittsburgh University. Yeah, Pitt drove an autonomous vehicle from Pittsburgh to LA in the 1970s, and it was 99% autonomous driving, because it was 99% on the freeway, and all it would do is sit in the lane and drive at the speed and step on the brakes. As soon as you had to pull off, get gas, go to the hotel, then the human had to take over. So in a lot of ways, what Volvo's talking about in terms of freeway driving is old technology. It's the new stuff that's catches people's eyes. There's a note in the comments, auto braking, adaptive cruise, self-parking, all those jobs that we just suck at.
I actually think, though, that self-driving cars are part of a change that is going to be really, really disruptive, and that I don't think we've really faced. And that is the fact that we are building more and more technologies that a lot of them based on AI, so specific AIs, not general AIs, that are displacing workers at a faster and faster clip. A lot of the work lawyers used to do is now being done by computer. Now, long distance trucking, and then eventually short distance trucking. As more and more jobs go away, we have a society based on your self-worth, and your ability to live is based on you working. So there's a very small percentage of rich people who are separate from this. But if you are in a career that can easily be replaced, a factory worker, it is coming to the point where journalists, there'll be a much smaller number, even programmers. A lot of programming is becoming automatic. And I think as a society, we don't really know what that looks like. There's already the idea that 30 to 40% of what everyone's job is bullshit. That's actually the title of the book, so I'm not swearing, I'm quoting. But statistically, a lot of what we do is make work. But is that the plan, that we're just going to make people do make work and put in 40 hours a week, or make it so that you're paid enough for 3 hours that you're actually needed? Or are we just going to have a massively bifurcated society with, walled cities and people on the outside? And the people that we're talking about may not be who we think, because picking crops is one of those things that's harder to automate. I mean, they do it in certain areas and certain types of crops, but some crops are really hard to do.
That's a gold mine if you can automate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at least in terms of looking at this as being so disruptive, I mean, is it more disruptive than what we had, 100 years ago or so, when 95% of the people are farmers, to now we're down to, what is it, 1 or 2% of the people farm?
I think the thing is, and that's kind of what I touched on earlier, it becomes a rate problem. It's how fast that disruption can spread through the society versus how fast the society can adapt to it.
Well, it was pretty fast, though, right? I mean, displacement of farming was pretty fast.
And it was pretty damn disruptive.
It was very disruptive, but honestly, it wasn't all that fast. It was measured in decades and even in generations. Now we're talking about disruptive technologies that can be put together, commercialized, put out, and be distributed worldwide in months. There's a huge difference between having 10 years to adapt and having 10 weeks to adapt.
Yeah, well, at least for the self-driving cars and trucks, it's not going to be months. It is going to be probably decades.
Oh, yeah. But other technologies are just, the capabilities are just amazing. And it's a little scary because, tomorrow somebody could come up with the perfect chatbot, and all of a sudden 60,000 people that work in call centers are out of work the next day.
Well, and this is, Jim, that's exactly why science fiction gets it wrong, like 100% of the time. It's extremely difficult to predict the future accurately because there are these, what's the opposite of a single point failure? These single point successes that blossom outward. They're impossible to predict, and they do have very radical changes on just the whole fabric of society. Household robots, we've been talking about household robots for a long time. We don't know when they're arriving, but there will come a day, there definitely will come a day when a robot can be your butler and can do a good job of it. Yep. And then suddenly, I suppose that might take a decade also before we all have robot butlers, because they'll be expensive at first. But, okay, fine. That's a prediction that's easy to make. We'll have robot butlers in 30 years. We probably will. But the technology that enables robot butlers will also enable something that we never thought of that will be very, very disruptive.
Yep.
Robot road workers, that just sort of come out when no one's around and patch the roads, or, just the same general idea, just much bigger.
I figured we could do robots to do those sign spinning things, and then after that they could then go to work on street corners panhandling and put all the panhandlers out of business.
Yeah, and someone just suggested robot caregivers, and you're seeing both robot butlers and robot caregivers. I mean, the technology is early, but it's moving faster than you'd think.
Yeah.
Sure. The difference there is that caregivers, there are parts of the world that have a definite shortage of caregivers. And so there's a huge economic incentive to get robots into those tasks. It's not with the intention of displacing anybody, but once the technology gets good enough, it will displace actual workers. One thing that's nice about a robot butler is that we're not putting a lot of butlers out of work with that. Butler is not a huge economic activity in our society.
Of course, Jim threw in the how far behind our robot girlfriends, and I think that's there's been a push on that. We were displaying out at CES 10 years ago when one of the first of the semi-functional sex droids was being done at the same time, because then CES and the adult entertainment conventions overlapped. Now, they haven't gone very far, but you look at real dolls and you look at things like that, there's an entire another workforce that's potentially going to be put out of work.
Yeah, that's
not just workforce, but that would be a huge disruption to everything. Families, would that cause a real population decline? Potentially.
Futurama did an episode on that, which I think was bang on.
Bang on, nice.
So So what about technologies that everyone is talking about as disruptive that probably aren't? I'm going to start because otherwise Will's going to steal my list. I'll give you my list and justify them if anyone wants me to. So blockchain would be number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on my list. I also, where is my list? Now I have to find my list so I can read it. Quantum computing, I don't think is going to be hugely disruptive. I think it's going to be useful for a set of specific problems, but the rest of us, okay, we'll use a different algorithm to generate our public-private keys, and then no one will care. 5G, I don't think it's going to be particularly disruptive because it, doesn't go through walls. So those are my big ones. So what about the rest of you?
I hate to say it, I honestly think AI is not going to be all that disruptive. I think we're already seeing general AI aside, what we're seeing are small special purpose tasks that are spreading like wildfire throughout our common devices. They incrementally improve the capability of it. So, we've got long distance trucking. You can think of that as that's going to be a little bit disruptive, but not a lot of people actually work in the long distance trucking industry. So they, piece by piece, we're getting, again, boiled like a frog as more and more of this comes out. Barring, a singularity, we're going to see just everything gets a little bit smarter, and we just adapt to it as it goes. Because once again, I come back to be disruptive, it has to have a rate of change that's significant compared to our responses.
So why are you barring a singularity?
I'm not barring it. I was just saying if we do have a singularity, that will probably be disruptive. Sort of by definition.
I think a singularity isn't an event, though. I mean, if we're talking about a singularity in the strict Werner Vinge sense, you talk about an exponential curve. But an exponential curve looks the same at all magnifications.
Yeah, so, I think that's why he said it's not an exponential, right? It's faster than exponential.
Well, even a hyper exponential when you math it out. But I think we come back to there's that point in the curve, because when you look at what the original thought behind the singularity was, it was fine as long as it was growing more slowly than we were. But then there was that point where suddenly it could adapt and grow faster than we could keep up. And that was really the point defined as the singularity. So once again, we're back to that rate problem. How fast does it change compared to how fast can we react?
Well, here's something I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, this is sort of an interesting, the idea of it's only disruptive if you notice it. And I'm not sure that's entire. I think, it was disruptive, but we hit a point, as you were saying, where suddenly, AI has replaced so many jobs that suddenly economies collapse, or people start going on strike, or
they dramatically change. Like Lights in the Tunnel, did a nice analysis of the socioeconomic changes that are necessary in order to support a dramatic shift in how people work, or the very definition of work. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I'm going to jump in with something that's neither technological nor rate dependent, and that's the discovery of alien life. I mean, this phosphorus in the atmosphere of Venus, we find these sort of not asymmetries. We find things that are out of balance in the atmospheres of planets that are difficult to explain by any means other than biology. And there will come a point, there will come a discovery that's just a smoking gun, where we just say, okay, this is definitely, alien life. It definitely didn't come from Earth. I think that's actually pretty likely to happen in the next 30 years.
So
it's really likely to happen, but is it that disruptive? I mean, how is it that different from discovering the life that was living on undersea vents?
No, that's my point. That's my point, is that people often talk about that as an event that would change everything. But no, I think it doesn't change very much at all. It's a subtle psychological shift, but I don't think it will have very much effect.
Of course, it's intelligent life.
Oh, sorry, go on, Steve.
of course, unless it's intelligent life, then that
And then come
completely
knocking on the door.
well, you know, or even if it's just, you know, radio communications, right? I think that would be a big deal.
So since you brought up space, I want to do a quick screen share about a potential disruptive, not quite technology. Share. Okay, so this is us, right? You know, the little blue marble floating out there.
Yes, right.
And one of the biggest things that I worry about, of course, is litter, because litter is really bad for the environment. This is a slightly different view of the planet. That's Earth, surrounded by the estimated 2 million or so chunks of space junk that are floating out there. A lot of it in low Earth orbit, a lot of it in higher Earth orbit, a lot of it defined. One of the things that could be a really, really disruptive event would be what's called the Kessler Syndrome, where one of them bumps into the other. Last week, I think 2 satellites came within 38 feet of each other in orbit, and their combined speed was something like 20,000 miles an hour. That's really kind of scary because we depend so much on technology in low Earth orbit and mid Earth orbit, GPS, satellite, comms. And of course we have SpaceX pushing another, I think they're projecting 42,000 more satellites up in the next 20 years. The odds of something bumping go up exponentially with every new piece of something we put up there. And that would be, you get that, Sandra Bullock. Thank you, Paul.
I was just about to make a Sandra Bullock comment. So
yep, absolutely. And, it shows up in science fiction a lot. You see science fiction stories where the premise is that we're going to deliberately create one in order to shield ourselves from an outside alien civilization. Or more frequently, somebody's taking your system out to lock you into your planet so that now you cannot get off the planet. But if that tumbles, yeah, that would be pretty disruptive.
Even if they don't, I mean, just think about that many satellites positioned deliberately so that there is nowhere left in the night sky where you can look up. What if you're an astronomer? I mean, there is no longer a pristine night sky that doesn't have things zooming through.
That's a huge problem, especially with the Starlinks, because they are very, very reflective. Their albedo is really high.
The first ones were they've already
knocked it down by about 10% on this one, and they're going to try and go for 25. There's a great shot from, I think, Mauna Loa Observatory showing a constellation of Starlink going by while they're trying to do an observation on a nebula or whatever. Yeah, it's definitely, light pollution is going to become more and more of a problem. Orbital garbage collectors.
Yeah.
Technology.
Collecting the garbage, might be an important
a growth industry.
A big industry of the future. Yeah.
Definitely.
So forget what we think might be coming. What's something that we wish was coming to disrupt how things were working? Something that we like. I'll give a for instance, like if fusion technology wasn't always 10 years in the future and we could actually have fusion power. I mean, what's something that people would like to really see there being huge funding pushed into that could potentially be disruptive, although whether we can, it would be if we did it.
Photonic thrust space travel, I would absolutely love.
Okay. Is that disruptive beyond?
It is, because if you do a proper sort of like just something that I try to explore in my books as well, but if you have basically like a light way, so where you have, and there's research been going on for decades on this,
Sure.
but YK Bay in particular is amazing papers, where you can have, sort of routine travel between, Earth and Mars, for instance, make it a week, less than a week one way. It's incredible. You can get near relativistic speeds, including for interstellar travel, even if it's like 0.1 C. You can get there, which just 0.1 C, but you can get there. You can get there quite, relatively easily. In which case, Alpha Centauri is only 40 years away. It's feasible.
And I think, you know, we saw a similar thing with development of technologies in sailing ships that radically changed the exploration of Europe into, you know, as they would like to call it, the discovered new worlds. But as that speed dropped, as that speed increased and the travel time dropped, it radically changed the economics of getting tobacco or getting, you know, all of these other commodities back and forth. So yeah, that could be very disruptive.
Anyone else have any?
I think fusion is not very unlikely. You know, it's fun to say it's 30 years in the future and always will be. But there are so many people working on different avenues of it. One of the problems that fusion has faced is it's been a government boondoggle. It's been, you know, government agencies employing government scientists to do a small number of things. And when those small number of things don't work, we say, well, fusion doesn't work. What we're seeing now is private industry and private investors stepping in to try a large number of things. And a lot of these things are really good ideas. They're not just retreading things that have already been tried. They're entirely new approaches. So I think it's not at all implausible that we'll see that breakthrough happen in the next 30 years. Certainly in the next 100, I think it's inevitable.
There's a new
but-
project that just started in California with 100 million funding and some evidence of producing more power than they put in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and Will, I think that touches back on your point about battery technology, because ultimately why we increase battery technology is so that we can have more power, more portable, and in the palm of our hand, and that opens a lot of doors. I mean, we think of all the science fiction stuff where, you know, you've got anti-gravity and you've got all this other stuff that's just a huge power hog, but we don't have the batteries to run it. Fusion in, certainly, you know, we're talking now phone booth. Well, for people who remember what a phone booth was, phone booth size fusion reactors and getting smaller as increasing the availability and deliverability of power opens so many doors.
So listen, we're down to the last 5 minutes. So let's answer some of the questions that have come up. Jim Henderson wanted to know, what are some technologies you thought would take off and be disruptive but failed, other than presumably the Segway? We talked a little bit about this, but if anyone has any other thoughts.
Betamax, no.
I still have a Betamax player. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I guess we covered that topic. What about Paul Sizek wants to know about recycling, particularly for some of the fancier batteries. I mean, obviously, lead acid batteries have been recyclable to an extent. And
I think that people should feel just fine about throwing things away in a landfill. I think it's economically inevitable that landfills will become mines. Certainly within the next 100 years, people will be digging that stuff up and just kind of zone refining it into its constituent elements. That'll be much cheaper than, I mean, like the United States does have a repository of rare earth elements, but it's in Death Valley. And the logistical challenges, honestly, I think the logistical challenges of mining in Death Valley are comparable to those of mining on asteroids. Whereas digging up a garbage dump is a lot easier, and it probably has certainly the average cubic meter of garbage dump has more gold than the average cubic meter of gold mine. I think the same is probably true for rare earth elements as well.
So we take a giant step forward to the late 1800s with rag and bone men scouring through the dumps.
I'm actually
hopefully it'll be robots, but
yeah. I'm pretty excited about some of the technology they're developing with bacteria that can break up plastic and actually be able to recycle plastic instead of recycle plastic, which is
as long as we don't turn it into some of the classic science fiction
gray goo.
That obviously would never happen.
Never.
But it would be disruptive.
Plastic. If we're making bacteria that can digest plastic, I want those in my gut.
Well, yeah. Although what else they digest might be a big question for you too. I might be worried about that too.
So one other point on recycling batteries, though, a little bit shorter term. It's been talked about, and I think it is going to happen, that a lot of these batteries in electric cars, will lose half their capacity, and then at that point, that you either need to replace it or get a new car or whatever. But that same battery would be very useful for storing energy, say in your home, if you're going to have solar cells on your roof and want to have electricity at night and not be dependent on the grid. That you can take those old electric car batteries and mount them in your garage, and they're perfectly useful.
My grandparents back in Minnesota had a wind tower with an old alternator off a Model T and a root cellar that had a rack of lead acid batteries on it. That was how they powered their farm.
Wow.
So just the last comment from Jim Henderson. He recommends reprogramming the American dream from rural America to Silicon Valley, making AI service all, which is a nice 18th century length of title for a book. But I haven't read it, but I don't know if anyone else has.
I'm going to have to go find it.
Yeah, but we're basically out of time. But if people have lost comments.
This is my new book. It's called Rich Man's Sky. It'll be out in April. You should be a disruptor yourself and buy this book.
It looks awfully thin, I have to say.
and a very large format as well.
Yeah.
Very happy if anybody wants to reach out on Twitter at SpaceLawyerSF. Also, just wanted to plug that Always Greener, the first book in my series, came out this year, is currently free everywhere. Because we did a big book club deal this week, which had like 17,000 people pick it up. Anyway, so definitely, it's just, I think today and maybe for the next day or two, it's still going to be free. So, it's a good time to pick it up.
Absolutely.
That's Always Greener.
I'm good unless somebody needs, short-term predictions of immediate future.
Steve?
No, I don't have any book to plug. I guess I can plug buy a self-driving car that has a Luminar LiDAR in it.
Yeah. And I'll definitely be buying Will's book because I really like Will's books. So thank you to the audience and some of the great comments and questions. Thank you to the panelists. This has been very fun and interesting. And
thank you for the awesome moderation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sorry, I kept sneaking off to answer questions about Zoom sessions. So I apologize for that, for getting distracted. So, well, thank you very much. That's it.
A pleasure as always.
Take care, folks.
Bye.
Great meeting y'all.